The US has just built a new prison, designed specifically for Venezuela's most dangerous cartel leaders.
I was sleeping in a cell with 27 people, bro. There was someone sleeping on the toilet.
Inmates' experiences are horrifying. Clear proof that the US is going all out to punish cartel members in the harshest ways possible. But the real question is, why? Well, you're about to find out. US opens new prison for cartels. The United States has just taken a shocking step in its war against organized crime. It has unveiled a new maximum security prison specifically built for Venezuelan cartel members. This isn't just another federal lockup. Reports describe it as one of the harshest facilities ever created, with advanced surveillance, isolation units, and zero-contact policies. Officials claim it's the only way to contain men considered too violent and too influential for traditional prisons. But why was it really built, and what's happening inside those walls that the government doesn't want you to know? Let me take you back to where this all began. On March 16, 2025, a plane touched down at an undisclosed location in El Salvador. On board were not just any passengers, but 238 alleged members of Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang that had become the Trump administration's newest public enemy #1. But these individuals weren't heading to some newly constructed American supermax facility. Instead, they were being delivered to something far more sinister: El Salvador's Terrorism Confinement Center, known by its Spanish acronym CIECOT, a facility so notorious that human rights organizations have condemned it as one of the world's most brutal prisons.
So we're inside what's called CIECOT. It's one of the most notorious prisons, really, in the entire world at this point.
The U.S. deported 238 alleged TDA members and 23 MS-13 gang members to El Salvador's CIECOT under a bilateral agreement. This wasn't just any ordinary deportation. This was the culmination of a deal struck between the Trump administration and El Salvador's controversial President Nayib Bukele, a man who had gained international attention for his iron-fisted approach to gang violence in his own country. The financial arrangements of this deal revealed just how calculated this move was. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele announced the transfer, stating the U.S. would pay $6 million annually, roughly $20,000 per detainee, for a one-year term. Think about that for a moment. $20,000 per person per year to essentially outsource America's detention problem to a foreign nation known for its harsh treatment of prisoners. But how did we get to this point? To understand the full scope of what happened, we need to examine the legal mechanisms that made this possible. The U.S. used the Alien Enemies Act to classify TDA as a predatory incursion, allowing expedited removals without trials or asylum hearings. This is where the story becomes truly chilling. The Alien Enemies Act, a piece of legislation dating back to 1798, was dusted off and weaponized to bypass fundamental due process rights that are supposed to be guaranteed to anyone on American soil. This wasn't just about removing people from the United States. This was part of the Trump administration's crackdown on TDA, which it designated a foreign terrorist organization in February 2025. The designation of Tren de Aragua as a terrorist organization was a political masterstroke that allowed the administration to use extraordinary measures that would normally be reserved for international terrorists or enemy combatants. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. When researchers began digging into who exactly was being deported, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of misidentification and potential human rights violations. Many deportees had no U.S. criminal records. Only 32 committed low-level crimes, and 20 had foreign convictions. This means that out of 238 people sent to one of the world's most brutal prisons, the vast majority had never been convicted of any crime in the United States. Even more troubling, some were targeted based on tattoos mistaken for gang symbols, things like roses or family names. The timing of this operation was also highly suspicious. The initial flight arrived on March 16, 2025, despite a U.S. court order temporarily blocking such deportations. This means that the Trump administration proceeded with this mass deportation, even while the courts were actively trying to halt it. A move that speaks to either incredible confidence in their legal position or a willingness to operate outside the bounds of judicial oversight. So what exactly is this facility, and why should we be concerned about sending anyone there? CIECOT was opened as part of El Salvador's anti-gang crackdown. It is a maximum security facility with a capacity of 40,000. To put that number in perspective, that's larger than many American cities. This isn't just a prison, it's a small city designed for detention and suffering. It has been criticized by human rights groups like Amnesty International for conditions amounting to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. When Amnesty Amnesty International, an organization that has documented human rights abuses in some of the world's most oppressive regimes, singles out a facility for criticism that should give us serious pause about what happens within those walls. The conditions inside CCOT read like something from a dystopian nightmare. Inmates face what can only be described as inhumanity, designed not just to punish but to break the human spirit entirely.
Mi vida, gracias a esto, a lo que yo soy, fui en un momento, vine a perder a mi familia.
Detainees, including the deported Venezuelans, face 23.5-hour lockdowns, no visits, and forced labor. This means that for 23.5 hours every day, human beings are locked in cramped cells with virtually no human contact, no ability to see loved ones, and when they are allowed out, it's often to perform forced labor. The process of entering CCOT appears designed to be traumatic and dehumanizing from the very first moment. Inmates describe it as hell, with abuse upon arrival, including shaving of heads, shackling, and even pepper spraying. Aside from this initial treatment, the most disturbing aspect of this entire operation is what happened next. Just months after these 238 individuals were sent to this hellish facility, the story took another unexpected turn. A declassified memo from May 2025 revealed that the Maduro regime in Venezuela probably does not actually direct Tren de Aragua operations in the United States, directly contradicting the policy claims that had been used to justify the harsh crackdown. In other words, the entire premise for treating these individuals as foreign agents or terrorists was built on a foundation that the government's own intelligence agencies found to be questionable. The story becomes even more surreal when we consider that by July 2025, reports indicated that most or all of the Venezuelan prisoners in CCOT had been exchanged back to Venezuela in a prisoner swap for 10 American detainees held in Caracas. This means that after months of international controversy, legal battles, and human rights violations, the entire operation effectively ended with the very people the U.S. had fought so hard to remove being returned to the country they had originally fled from. This prisoner swap reveals the true nature of what had occurred. These 238 people weren't sent to CCOT because they were dangerous criminals who posed an ongoing threat to American society. They were sent there as bargaining chips in a larger geopolitical game between the United States and Venezuela. They were human pawns used to secure the release of American citizens, and once that objective was achieved, they were traded away just as easily as they had been deported. This effectively ended their detention in CCOT after a few months, but the psychological and physical trauma they endured during those months in one of the world's most brutal prisons cannot be undone. There is no doubt that most U.S. prison systems are adapted to punish cartel members severely. First of all, there is constant surveillance. Inmate cells may have cameras, and guards check them regularly. Their movements inside the prison are controlled. Even meals are sometimes passed through slots in the door to avoid direct contact with guards. Strict prison conditions are meant to send a message. The U.S. government wants cartels to know that if they are captured, they will lose their freedom and live under harsh restrictions for the rest of their lives. This is very different from some prisons in Latin America, where corruption sometimes allows cartel members to live in comfort, run businesses, or even escape. By locking them in strict, controlled environments, the U.S. shows that no one is above the law, no matter how much power they once had. So far, these tough prison conditions have raised debates about human rights. Some argue that extreme isolation is similar to torture, and that prisoners should not be denied basic human interaction. On the other hand, many believe that cartel leaders are too dangerous to be treated like ordinary prisoners. Their ability to command murders, drug shipments, and bribes from inside a prison makes them unique threats. So for this reason, the U.S. continues to keep them under the strictest conditions possible.
Nadie dice que los delincuentes no tienen derechos, pero ¿por qué el enfoque es siempre en los derechos de los delincuentes y la gran mayoría de la gente honrada? Nadie le importan sus derechos.
To truly understand the magnitude of what occurred, we need to examine the actual conditions these people faced, the deadly incidents that happened within those walls. Inside the real, extreme prison. If you think you understand what an extreme prison looks like, prepare to have your assumptions shattered. The sheer scale of CCOT is mind-boggling in its audacity. This isn't just a large prison, it's a concrete city of despair, housing approximately 20,000 inmates in a facility designed to accommodate up to 40,000. To put this in perspective, imagine a space larger than most military bases, filled entirely with cells, guard towers, and surveillance equipment, all designed with one singular purpose: to break the human spirit through systematic isolation and deprivation. The daily routine at CCOT is designed to be psychologically devastating.
It's been equated to 7 football stadiums.
Inmates spend 23.5 hours per day locked in their cells, with only 30 minutes allowed outside for what prison officials euphemistically call recreation time. But even this brief respite from confinement is carefully controlled and monitored, taking place in small concrete yards surrounded by towering walls that block out most natural light. What makes CCOT particularly horrifying is its use of complete isolation as a form of psychological warfare. Prisoners have no access to family visits, no phone calls, and no meaningful human contact beyond their brief interactions with guards. For the Venezuelan deportees, this isolation was compounded by the fact that they were in a foreign country, speaking a language that some of them struggled with, cut off entirely from any support network they might have had. The architecture of CCOT itself tells a story of deliberate cruelty. The cells are small, cramped spaces with minimal furnishing, often just a concrete slab for sleeping and a basic toilet facility. The walls are painted in institutional colors designed to create a sense of monotony and despair, and the lighting is harsh and constant, making it difficult for prisoners to maintain any sense of normal sleep patterns. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of CCOT's design is its forced labor program. Under the guise of rehabilitation and making the prison self-sustainable, inmates are compelled to work in various industrial operations within the facility. This isn't voluntary job training or therapeutic activity. It's mandatory labor that generates profit for the prison system, while providing no meaningful skills or preparation for eventual reintegration into society. The psychological impact of these conditions cannot be overstated. Mental health experts who have studied the effects of prolonged solitary confinement, which is essentially what CCOT's 23.5-hour lockdown represents, have documented severe psychological deterioration, including depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and in extreme cases, complete psychological breakdown. For individuals who may have been wrongfully detained, such as many of the Venezuelan deportees, this psychological torture is compounded by the injustice of their situation. To make matters worse, the medical care available to CCOT inmates is minimal at best. Reports from human rights organizations document inadequate health care, limited access to medications, and a general disregard for the physical and mental well-being of prisoners. For individuals with chronic conditions, mental health issues, or those who develop health problems during their incarceration, CCOT becomes not just a prison, but potentially a death sentence carried out through medical neglect. What makes the U.S. deportation to CCOT even more controversial is the principle of non-refoulement, which is the international legal principle that prohibits returning people to territories where they face persecution, torture, or cruel treatment. By deporting individuals to a facility that human rights organizations have documented as engaging in cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, the United States violated its international legal obligations, effectively becoming complicit in the torture that followed. The surveillance system at CCOT is also mind-boggling. Every movement of every prisoner is tracked and recorded through an extensive network of cameras and sensors. There is no privacy, no moment of solitude that isn't being observed and documented. This constant surveillance serves not just security purposes, but creates a psychological atmosphere of perpetual scrutiny that adds another layer to the systematic dehumanization process. Additionally, the food provided to CCOT inmates reflects the prison's philosophy of minimal sustenance, designed to maintain life without providing any comfort or satisfaction. Meals consist of basic, often nutritionally inadequate portions, served in conditions that prioritize efficiency over human dignity. For many prisoners, the daily meal becomes not sustenance, but another reminder of their powerlessness and degradation. Now let's talk about the impact on families of CCOT prisoners. With no visitation rights and extremely limited communication, families of inmates, including the families of wrongfully deported Venezuelan migrants, are left in a state of perpetual uncertainty and grief. Parents don't know if their children are alive or dead, spouses are left to raise families alone while having no idea about their partner's condition, and children grow up not knowing if they'll ever see their parents again. What emerges from this detailed examination of CCOT's conditions is a clear picture of a facility that operates more like a torture chamber than a correctional institution. The combination of extreme isolation, minimal health care, forced labor, constant surveillance, and complete separation from family creates what mental health experts recognize as a perfect storm for psychological destruction. Interestingly, the international community's response to CCOT has been one of horror and condemnation. Amnesty, International, Human Rights Watch, and other major human rights organizations have documented the systematic abuses occurring within the facility and called for international intervention. Yet these calls have largely fallen on deaf ears, with political considerations taking precedence over human rights concerns. The Venezuelan deportees caught in this system found themselves in a particularly nightmarish situation. Not only were they subjected to the same brutal conditions as all CCOT inmates, but they were also dealing dealing with the additional trauma of being in a foreign country, often without understanding the language or legal system, and with no access to consular services or legal representation. This raises serious questions about the actual purpose of this prison facility that the US has created. A potential political game. While the world was focused on the dramatic deportations to CICOT, the real story of where the United States actually houses Venezuelan and other cartel members reveals a complex web of existing facilities that'll make anyone shiver. The crown jewel of America's actual extreme prison system is ADX Florence in Colorado, often called a clean version of hell by those who study it. This isn't a new facility built for Venezuelan cartels, but rather a decades-old supermax prison that has become the final destination for the world's most notorious criminal figures, including approximately 20% international drug lords and cartel leaders. The facility represents the pinnacle of American prison technology and psychological isolation techniques, refined over decades of operation. ADX Florence is where Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the former leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, currently serves his life sentence under conditions that his lawyers have described as cruel and unusual punishment. El Chapo's complaints about his treatment, including extreme isolation, limited visits, and psychological torture through sensory deprivation, provide a window into the reality of how America actually deals with high-profile cartel leaders, and it's far more systematically brutal than most people realize. Now, ADX Florence isn't operating in isolation. The recent guilty plea of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, co-founder of the Sinaloa Cartel in August 2025, highlighted how the U.S. justice system has become increasingly sophisticated in its approach to capturing and processing cartel leadership. Zambada's case represents the culmination of decades-long investigations that involved international cooperation, advanced surveillance technology, and complex legal maneuvering that makes the crude deportation tactics used for lower-level suspects seem almost primitive. The international dimension of America's prison strategy reveals patterns that go far beyond the CICOT controversy. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Prisons operates multiple supermax and high-security facilities specifically designed for inmates posing extreme risks, including terrorists, spies, and organized crime figures. These facilities aren't cartel-specific, but they've evolved into de facto cartel containment centers through the simple mathematics of who ends up requiring maximum security detention. What makes the American approach particularly sophisticated is its use of extradition treaties and international cooperation agreements that make the CICOT deportation deal seem almost amateur by comparison. Rather than building new facilities or making controversial outsourcing arrangements, the U.S. has developed a systematic approach to bringing cartel leaders to American soil, where they can be processed through the federal court system and housed in facilities that are brutal but technically legal under American constitutional standards. The contrast of this practice with respect to Mexico's approach to housing cartel members reveals important lessons about the effectiveness and humanity of different prison strategies. El Hongo Prison in Tecate, Baja California, for instance, represents Mexico's attempt to create an incorruptible maximum security facility specifically designed to house cartel figures. Built in 2002 as Mexico's first modern supermax, inspired by American designs like ADX Florence, El Hongo cost $45 million and was deliberately located in a desert location to prevent escapes. El Hongo's high-tech surveillance systems and isolation protocols make it extreme due to its technological sophistication and the psychological pressure created by constant monitoring. However, even this facility has struggled with the broader corruption issues that plague Mexico's prison system. This highlights the challenge of creating truly secure facilities for cartel members in countries where the cartels themselves have significant economic and political influence. Mexico's Altiplano prison near Toluca is another example. Opened in 1991 as a maximum security facility for federal crimes, this facility has become heavily associated with cartel leadership detention. The prison gained international notoriety as the site of El Chapo's dramatic 2015 tunnel escape, but it has continued to house major cartel figures, including El Maro and Ociel Cardenas. The conditions at Altiplano, including extensive solitary confinement and restricted communications, have been criticized for being inhumane, yet the facility continues to operate as a crucial component of Mexico's strategy for containing organized crime leadership. The evolution of these prison strategies reveals important lessons about the relationship between punishment, deterrence, and human rights. The most revealing aspect of the current prison landscape is the Trump administration's broader strategy, something that goes far beyond the CICOT deportations. The May 2021 2025 executive order to rebuild Alcatraz as Alligator Alcatraz for violent offenders, with an estimated annual cost of $450 million to private contractors. This is a dramatic escalation in American prison policy, one that makes the CCOT arrangement look like a minor experiment. The Alcatraz project reveals the true scope of the administration's vision for extreme incarceration. Rather than building new facilities from scratch or relying on foreign partnerships, the plan involves rehabilitating one of America's most notorious former prisons using modern technology and private contractors. This approach combines historical symbolism with cutting-edge prison management techniques, creating a facility that would likely surpass even ADX Florence in terms of security and isolation protocols. The use of Guantanamo Bay for Venezuelan criminal migrants is also another dimension of this expanded detention strategy. In February 2025, over a dozen highly dangerous Venezuelan criminal migrants were sent to Guantanamo for temporary detention pending deportation. This represents an expansion of Guantanamo's use beyond terrorism suspects, indicating a willingness to blur the lines between different categories of extreme detention. When the U.S. designated cartels as terrorist organizations in February 2025, they enabled asset seizures and military operations that went far beyond what would be possible under traditional criminal law frameworks. This legal evolution has created new categories of extreme punishment that operate in a gray area between criminal justice and national security policy. The story of America's extreme prison for Venezuelan cartel members ultimately reveals itself to be something far more complex and troubling than any viral headline could capture. Rather than building new facilities, the U.S. has created a web of existing extreme facilities, international partnerships, and legal frameworks that allow for unprecedented levels of punishment and control while maintaining plausible deniability about the human rights implications. The United States has learned that regular prisons are not enough to hold dangerous cartel members. These criminals often continue to run their drug businesses from behind bars using bribery, smuggling, and secret messages. To stop this, the U.S. is building supermax prisons, facilities designed with extreme security to cut off all contact and control. Now you may ask, why implement such drastic measures? Well, the answer lies in the cartel drug trade. The drug trade run by Mexican cartels has caused serious harm in the United States for many years. These criminal groups have built powerful networks that traffic drugs across the southern border and into American cities. While the cartels themselves are based in Mexico, their actions have deeply affected the safety, health, and economy of the U.S. One of the biggest harms is the spread of dangerous drugs. Cartels are the main suppliers of illegal drugs such as heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl in the United States. Fentanyl in particular is extremely deadly. Even a small amount can kill a person, and it has fueled a nationwide crisis. Thousands of Americans die every year from overdoses linked to fentanyl and other cartel-supplied drugs. This has devastated families and communities across the country. Another major issue is violence and crime. When cartels push their drugs into U.S. cities, they often work with gangs to distribute them. This creates competition, which leads to shootings, robberies, and turf wars. Innocent people can get caught in the middle of this violence. Police forces also struggle to deal with the growing crime connected to drug trafficking, making some neighborhoods unsafe. The cartels also cause harm through addiction and health problems. When people become addicted to drugs, it damages not only their health, but also their families and communities. Addiction can lead to job loss, homelessness, and broken families. Hospitals and emergency services are overwhelmed by the number of overdose cases, which puts pressure on the U.S. healthcare system. Economically, the drug trade costs the United States billions of dollars every year. Money is lost through healthcare expenses, law enforcement efforts, prison costs, and lost productivity when people cannot work due to addiction. Instead of supporting the economy, this money is funneled into criminal organizations that continue to grow stronger. And then there's the weakened border security and trust between the U.S. and Mexico. Cartel smuggling operations use tunnels, hidden compartments in cars, and even human couriers to move drugs across the border. This makes it harder for border agents to control illegal trafficking. It also creates tension in the political relationship between the two countries, as both sides struggle to deal with the problem. In general, Mexican cartels have caused enormous harm in the United States through their drug trade. This is probably the reason why the U.S. is taking drastic measures to punish offenders. As we look toward the future, the expansion of facilities like Alcatraz and the continued use of places like ADX Florence suggest that America's approach to extreme punishment is evolving in ways that are almost alarming. Do you think this new prison is justice or something more dangerous? Let me know in the comments section. For more videos like this, click on the next card on your screen.